The council station floated in orbit above a pale green world, its corridors humming with the voices of 100 species. Every arching hallway and crystalline chamber was designed to project harmony, but beneath the polished surfaces ran fractures as sharp as glass. Old rivalries simmered. Trade disputes festered. The Galactic Council was a cathedral of diplomacy, yet it felt more like a battlefield where words replaced weapons. Humans had been invited only a generation ago, and their presence still unsettled many. They were younger than most stellar nations, less populous, less ancient in tradition, yet they had gained their seat through decisive victories in border wars that no one thought they could win. Their reputation was complicated, innovative, volatile, unyielding when threatened. Some admired their adaptability, while others whispered that humans were dangerous because they remembered grudges too vividly and loved too fiercely. On this particular cycle, a child wandered the grand markets near the council's core. She was no more than 8 years old, with a shock of black hair tied into a loose braid and eyes wide with wonder. The daughter of Ambassador Alara Vose, she had slipped free from her escorts for a handful of minutes. She pressed her hands against glass cases of alien artifacts, giggled at a hovering vendor drone that chopped in 6 languages, and peered up at towering figures with an innocent awe that softened even the sternest gods. Around her swirled the vibrant chaos of the galaxy's diversity, scaled merchants, crystalline artisans, beings of mist contained in shimmering suits. To them, she was fragile, out of place, yet oddly compelling. Her laughter was brief. A group of warriors from the Carthage Dominion noticed her. Their armor was jagged, decorated with the teeth of conquered foes. The Dominion had long despised humanity, regarding their admission into the council as an insult to ancient powers. The Warlord who led them had argued often in the chamber that humans were no more than vermin dressed in diplomacy. Now one of his lieutenants saw the child standing alone and felt an opportunity. They surrounded her with deliberate menace. The child froze, her smile faltering as a clawed hand reached toward her braid. A Carthage sneered, muttering in a guttural tongue that did not need translation. "Prey, weakling, nothing." The air seemed to thicken with malice. Traders stepped back, unwilling to intervene, their faces pale with the knowledge of what such an insult meant. To harm a diplomat's bloodline was not just violence, it was a declaration of contempt. The first blow was not lethal. It was a shove that sent her stumbling to the floor, her knees scraping against smooth stone. She cried out, a small sound swallowed quickly by the vast chamber. One of the soldiers laughed, deep and cruel, raising his boot as though to pin her like an insect. To them, it was sport. To others, it was madness. To humanity, it was unforgivable. A single alarm chime echoed through the market as nearby council guards hesitated. Protocol demanded neutrality until official orders came from the chamber, but no written rule accounted for the sight of a human child battered on council grounds. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. Some feared what the humans would do, others doubted they could respond fast enough. The station systems marked the time, 0 minutes since the attack. Ambassador Vose heard the alert from across the plaza, her pulse seizing. She ran, her robes dragging behind her, but she knew before she arrived that she would be too late to prevent the insult. By the time she reached the scene, her daughter's lip was split, her small hands trembling as she tried to shield herself. The Carthage warriors stood over her like executioners awaiting an audience. The ambassador's scream cracked the air, raw with terror and rage. Behind her, another figure entered the chamber, moving not with panic but with grim inevitability. Commander Joranhale, security chief of the human delegation, tall, broad-shouldered, face carved in hard lines. He did not speak, not yet. He simply looked at the child on the floor, and then at the warriors who had dared to touch her. The silence around him was heavier than any shout. His presence carried the weight of a promise long spoken among humans but rarely understood by outsiders. Harm one of ours, and we will make you regret it. The Carthage sneered again, but their bravado wavered as Hale's gaze fixed upon them. There was no fury in his expression, only the cold precision of a man already calculating the end of their warlord. In that moment, everyone watching understood that the attack was not merely an assault on a child. It was the opening blow of something far larger, something that would end in blood. Station guards glanced at one another, paralyzed. Alien merchants backed away, whispering of ancient warnings about humanity's wrath. The council itself had not yet convened, But it would not matter. The decision had already been made in the set of Hale's jaw, in the steel of his stride. 10 minutes was all he would need. The Carthage lieutenant barked a laugh, still pretending confidence, still believing the station's laws would shield him. He spat near the child and muttered about broken species, about weakness. The words were loud enough to carry across the chamber. Hale heard them, memorized them, and stepped forward once. His boots rang against the stone, sharp and final, like the toll of a bell marking the hour of execution. The air tasted of dread. Even those who hated humanity felt their throats dry. They knew what was about to unfold, and none of them would intervene. They would watch, and they would remember. The child clung to her mother, sobbing quietly. Ambassador Vos pressed her close, her eyes wide not with fear of the Carthage anymore, but with something else entirely, fear of what her own kind was about to unleash. She whispered her daughter's name, tried to shield her eyes, but she knew the sound of that single bootstep meant the course of events could not be altered. In that suspended moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The chamber clock ticked forward. 1 minute had passed since the first strike against the human child. 9 remained, though none present could imagine how swiftly those minutes would vanish, nor how irrevocably the balance of power would shift once they were gone. Commander Joran Hale did not shout orders. He did not need to. His presence alone was an iron command, and the human delegation moved with the inevitability of a storm breaking over still water. The moment his hand touched the comms clasp on his wrist, silent signals leapt across secure bands. The humans had rehearsed this scenario 1,000 times in shadowed simulations. The child endangered, the threshold crossed, the mask of civility stripped away. Now it was no longer training. 2 minutes had passed. The Carthage warriors shifted uneasily, realizing too late that their mockery had drawn something ancient and unyielding into motion. Hale's eyes lingered on the lieutenant who had struck the child, mimicking every angle of his face. Then, with the smallest nod, he gave permission for retribution to unfold. Across the station, hidden compartments opened in the walls where humans had embedded security nodes without fanfare or announcement. No other species had noticed, or perhaps they had chosen not to notice, believing the humans too bound by treaties to use such precautions. Small drones unfurled like metallic crows, wings whispering as they cut through the corridors. They were not weapons of mass slaughter, yet, but precise, surgical extensions of human will. By the 3rd minute, the Dominion's Warlord was already moving. He had been in a council antechamber, arguing with subordinates, but the message reached him, humans mobilizing. He snarled, dismissing it as bluster, yet he ordered his guards to tighten formation around him. The Dominion's code was simple, might makes right, and the weak deserved to be broken. He believed the humans would rage, shout, perhaps demand recompense, but they would not dare strike him here, at the heart of the council. Hale walked past the cluster of Carthage soldiers, still posturing over the child. He did not touch them, not yet. Instead, he knelt before the girl, brushed a strand of hair from her bruised cheek, and whispered something only she could hear. The child nodded, her sobs softening, her small hands clutching her mother's sleeve. Hale rose again, and in his eyes was no hesitation. The Carthage would be dealt with, but first the serpent's head must be cut away. 4 minutes gone. Human Marines emerged from concealed entry points within the station, their armor matte and unadorned, their rifles slung not in threat but in certainty. They moved as a single organism, silent, unhurried, efficient. Other species watched from balconies and market stalls, stunned by how quickly the humans had materialized. It was as though they had been waiting for this, as though some deep instinct had kept them coiled, ready to strike. The hunt began in earnest. Drones mapped the station's arteries, predicting the Warlord's escape routes. Human operatives intercepted communication channels, flooding them with false reports. Every door the Warlord approached locked behind him. Every corridor twisted against him. His growls turned to curses as his honor guard found themselves funneled into narrower and narrower paths, their size and bulk working against them. By the 6th minute, Hale had joined the pursuit. He did not sprint. He moved with measured precision, each step echoing a promise. Those who encountered him shrank back, unwilling to test the resolve carved into his frame. To the council guards, he gave no explanation. To the onlookers, no justification. The humans did not plead their case in words, They would speak in action. The Warlord reached a fortified chamber near the council vaults. His guard slammed the doors shut, believing the thick alloy walls would buy time. He roared with triumph, declaring the humans cowards who would not breach his sanctuary. The sound carried through open comms, his arrogance still unbroken. 7th minute. The humans did not attempt to batter down the doors. They did not waste effort on brute force. Instead, they unleashed algorithms woven into the station's fabric long before today, backdoors planted by cautious engineers who had known this moment might one day come. Locks surrendered. Seals disengaged. The great doors parted not with an explosion but with a sigh, as though even the station itself had chosen not to protect the Warlord. Inside, his guards raised their weapons. The humans answered with silence. A single pulse from their rifles dropped the first rank. Smoke filled the chamber. Hale strode through it, his rifle steady but unused, his gaze fixed solely on the Warlord. The clash was brief, brutal, and final. Blades sparked against armor, but human precision tore through every defense. By the 8th minute, the Warlord's guards lay scattered across the floor, their boasts silenced. The Warlord bellowed, drawing a ceremonial blade longer than a human's arm. He charged, eyes blazing with hatred. Hale stepped aside, caught the Warlord's wrist, and with one motion wrenched the weapon free. The fight that followed was not elegant. It was not meant to be. It was a demonstration. Hale struck with the efficiency of a man who had no intention of prolonging violence. The Warlord's roar faltered into a grunt, then into silence. 9th minute. The chamber doors reopened, and out of the smoke walked Hale. In one hand, he carried the Warlord's blade. In the other, he held what remained of the Warlord himself. No one spoke. The sight of that severed head was answer enough to every whispered question, every doubting sneer, every insult. Humans had given their reply, and it was written in blood. He carried the trophy not as a barbarian might, but as a herald bearing a message. His boots rang against the council floor as he made his way toward the central chamber, the air parting around him like water around stone. Alien delegates shrank from his path, their eyes wide with the sudden understanding that the treaties and speeches had always been a thin veneer over something far older and far more dangerous. The 10th minute arrived as Hale entered the council chamber. Without ceremony, he placed the Warlord's head upon the polished stone floor at the center, where all delegates could see. Its eyes stared upward, empty, its mouth still twisted in arrogance that had not survived the blade. Hale said nothing. He did not need to. The silence that followed was not absence of sound but a presence of awe and dread. Every species present understood the lesson. Strike at a human child, and the retaliation would not be measured in sanctions or debates. It would come swiftly, decisively, and without hesitation. In the gallery above, the child clutched her mother's hand, her tears drying as she watched the chamber fall still. The council had sought to humble humanity. Instead, they had been reminded of a truth that could not be legislated away. The head sat where it had been placed, a grim sentinel presiding over the galaxy's most sacred hall. And with that image seared into their memories, none could deny what had been proven in 10 minutes. Humanity was not to be tested. The chamber did not erupt into noise, as it so often did when disputes arose. Instead, the silence grew heavier, thick as lead, pressing down on every delegate until the very act of breathing seemed loud. The Warlord's head remained on the floor, its lifeless gaze fixed upon the vaulted ceiling as if mocking the pretenses of diplomacy that had failed to shield it. None dared remove it. Ambassador Alara Vos held her daughter tightly, the girl's small frame trembling against her. Yet even in her fear, the child's eyes never left Commander Hale. She saw not the violence, not the blood, but the certainty in his movements, the way he had acted without hesitation. To her, he was a wall between her smallness and the cruelty that had sought to erase it. To the others, he was something else entirely, a reminder that humanity's promises of protection were not rhetoric but oath, carried out with steel and fire. One of the crystalline delegates finally broke the silence, its voice trembling like fractured glass. This is an outrage. Such barbarism cannot stand within these walls. The words were brittle, fragile things, and even as they left the delegate's lips, it seemed to regret them. For Hale did not answer with rebuttal, nor with threat. He only looked at it, his gaze cool, and the delegate's crystalline body dimmed as if recoiling from light. Another voice spoke, this one belonging to an elder of the HFY, a species older than human civilization itself. Not barbarism, it murmured, its tones deep and resonant. Law older than councils. You harm their kin, you invite their wrath. We were warned, though many chose not to listen. Murmurs rippled across the chamber, the gathered powers caught between fear and fascination. Some whispered of precedent. No other species had ever dared act with such open defiance on council ground. Others whispered of inevitability, that humanity had simply revealed what it had always been. Ambassador Vo stepped forward, her daughter still in her arms. Her voice was calm, though a storm lay beneath it. You speak of outrage, she said, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber. Where was your outrage when your warriors raised their hands against a child? Where were your protests when innocence was trampled underfoot? She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. We will not apologize for protecting our own. And if you consider that barbarism, then it is a title we will bear proudly. Her words struck with more force than Hale's blade. Delegates shifted in their seats, some ashamed, some resentful. None could claim ignorance. They had seen the attack, and their hesitation had been complicity. Humanity had not merely punished the offenders, it had exposed the Council's weakness, its inability to defend the most basic principle of coexistence. The head remained where it was, a punctuation mark on her speech. Hale stepped forward then, his boots deliberate, his figure casting a long shadow beneath the chamber's light. He spoke for the first time since the violence began, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. This is not a threat, he said. It is a warning already carried out. Remember it well. We do not seek war. We do not seek conquest. But if you lay hands upon our children, our kin, our people, there will be nowhere in this galaxy you may hide. The words were not shouted, yet they reverberated through the walls, through the bones of every listener. It was not a declaration of intent. It was a statement of fact. The council chamber itself seemed smaller after he spoke, as though the weight of his certainty pressed the air inward. From the balconies, lesser delegates whispered among themselves. A reptilian envoy hissed to its companion, "They are mad. They will burn everything." But the companion shook its scaled head, eyes narrowed. No, they are something else. They are guardians who have learned to strike harder than those they guard against. That is worse. Ilara's daughter pressed her face against her mother's shoulder, weary from tears. Ilara kissed the child's hair, her own heart torn between pride and dread. She had served among alien courts long enough to know what would follow, treaties strained, alliances reconsidered, whispers of whether humanity's seat at the council was a beacon or threat. Yet even knowing that, she could not regret Hale's actions. For a child's life was worth any political storm. A delegate of the Vea, tall and insectile, rose to its full height and spoke with deliberate precision. If we allow this act to stand unchallenged, then the council itself becomes meaningless. Today it was the Carthid. Tomorrow it may be any of us. Hale turned his gaze upon it. Then do not harm us, he replied simply. No threat, no embellishment, just the obvious truth. The Vea faltered, its segmented limbs trembling before it sat once more. A strange clarity settled over the chamber. For centuries, the council had operated on compromise, on carefully balanced equations of power and politics. Humanity had shattered that illusion in 10 minutes. They had shown that beneath the layers of bureaucracy, the galaxies still moved according to older laws, the law of blood, of family, of vengeance and protection. The Warlord's head, lying on the polished floor, was no longer just a corpse. It was a symbol, a warning to those who scorned humanity, a lesson etched in flesh. Delegates would debate endlessly whether it was justice or savagery, but none could deny its effectiveness. Ilara looked at Hale, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. You've changed everything. He did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the chamber, on the sea of faces that now regarded humanity with new eyes. He knew what she meant, though. This moment would echo across centuries. It would bind humanity's name to both fear and respect. At last, the council chair, a being of immense age and authority, rose slowly. Its voice was gravel and wind, ancient and weary. This matter will not be forgotten, it said. The council must deliberate, must decide what this means for us all. Hale inclined his head slightly, but his eyes gave nothing away. Deliberate all you wish, he said. Our answer has already been given. The session adjourned in silence. Delegates filed out, some glancing back at the head still resting in the chamber's center. None dared touch it. It would remain there, a stain on the council's dignity, until the humans themselves decided to remove it. As Alara carried her daughter toward their quarters, whispers trailed behind her. Words like barbarians and protectors, monsters and guardians, tangled together. No consensus, no resolution, only a shared recognition that the balance of the galaxy had shifted. Commander Hale lingered behind, standing alone before the grisly trophy. He studied it, not with triumph, but with the grim acceptance of a man who knew that lines once crossed could never be redrawn. The child was safe. The price had been paid. Yet the cost was only beginning. The chamber lights dimmed as the doors closed, leaving the Warlord's empty eyes to stare into the dark. And somewhere in that silence, a new chapter of galactic history began, written not in treaties or decrees, but in the memory of 10 minutes that had redefined what it meant to threaten a human. In the days that followed, the council station moved as if under a heavy shroud. Merchants still opened their stalls, diplomats still gave their speeches, and the ceremonial bells still marked the turning of hours, but every act seemed muted, tentative. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever a human passed. Even laughter felt forced, as though too much sound might draw unwanted attention. The memory of the Warlord's head had settled into every mind, lingering like the echo of thunder after a storm. Commander Joran Hale walked the corridors with the same steady pace as before, yet now entire groups parted for him. Eyes followed his back, not with admiration, but with the wary regard reserved for predators whose tolerance had been tested once and would not be tested again. He ignored them all. He had never cared for their approval, and he cared even less now. The child had lived, and that was all that mattered. Ambassador Alara Vos worked tirelessly in the days after the incident, meeting with envoys, negotiating with factions who demanded explanations or retribution. Each time, she repeated the same truth. The Carthid had crossed a line no civilization should cross. Her voice carried the sharpness of a mother who had almost lost her child. Some envoys respected her resolve. Others accused her of exploiting sympathy. None could shake the image of her daughter's blood on the council floor. The girl herself, still bandaged, wandered the human quarters in silence. She did not speak of the attack, nor of Hale's response, but sometimes she would draw on the station's digital slates, shapes of looming figures, and always a tall one standing between them and a smaller one. When Hale passed her, she would look up at him with wide eyes, uncertain, yet she never flinched. Something unspoken bound them, the understanding that he had acted so she might still draw breath. Among the other species, debate grew fierce. Some saw humanity as saviors, champions who had revealed the council's hypocrisy by avenging an innocent. Others saw them as a contagion, a young race too reckless to share in the delicate balance of interstellar politics. Old enemies of the Carthid celebrated in silence, relieved to see their rival humiliated. Allies of the Dominion cursed under their breath, but none offered vengeance. The message was too clear. The humans had demonstrated a speed and precision no alliance wanted to test. Within the council chambers, sessions stretched into exhaustion. Delegates argued over sanctions, over votes of censure, over the future of humanity's seat. But every time the debate reached its peak, the memory of Hale's calm words returned. We do not seek war. But if you lay hands upon our children, there will be nowhere you may hide. The council, for all its power, could not erase that reality. Hale himself spoke little during these proceedings. He left diplomacy to Alara, preferring to remain a shadow in the background. Yet his silence spoke louder than any speech. The other delegates understood that he was not restrained by treaties or procedure, but by his own discipline, and that was more frightening than open threats. For if such a man ever chose to act again, there would be no warning. One evening, as Alara returned from another fruitless council session, she found Hale standing at the viewport, staring at the green planet below. His reflection was a dark silhouette against the stars. She approached quietly, her daughter asleep in her quarters, and for a long moment neither spoke. At last, she broke the silence. "You know what they call you now?" she asked. He did not look away from the stars. Names do not concern me. They call you the Butcher of 10 Minutes. The Council fears you more than it fears the memory of the Warlord himself. Good, he said, his tone flat. Let them fear. Fear is cleaner than false trust. She studied him, noting the lines that seemed deeper on his face, the weariness in his eyes. You've changed everything. Humanity will never again be seen as the young race striving for respect. We are feared now. That is not the same thing. At that, he turned to her. It doesn't need to be. Respect is fragile. Fear endures. And our children will be safe. Ilara wanted to argue, to say that safety built upon terror could not last, but the memory of her daughter's blood silenced her. She knew he was right in one sense. The galaxy would hesitate before touching another human child. Yet she also knew seeds of resentment had been sown. Fear could unite, but it could also fester into vengeance. Elsewhere on the station, rumors spread. Some species considered approaching humanity with new treaties, eager to align themselves with such ruthless protectors. Others plotted quietly, whispering of coalitions strong enough to contain the humans before their influence grew too vast. Every whispered plan, however, faltered against the same truth. None wanted to be the first to test Hale's promise. The girl healed. Her laughter slowly returned, though it was quieter than before, more cautious. She would run down the human corridors, and sometimes she would call Hale's name, tugging at his hand until he relented to walk with her. He never smiled, but he walked, his long stride slowed to match her smaller steps. For her, the galaxy's most feared man was not a monster, but a shield. On the 7th day, the Council attempted to pass a resolution condemning humanity's actions. It failed. Too many delegates abstained, unwilling to tie themselves to a motion that might provoke another demonstration of human resolve. The chamber adjourned in weary silence, and from that silence emerged a new reality. The humans were untouchable, not because of treaties or votes, but because everyone now understood the cost of testing them. That night, in the quiet of her quarters, Ilara held her daughter as she slept. She thought of Earth, of oceans and mountains far away from this station of glass and steel, and she wondered if humanity's path among the stars had just veered onto a course that could not be corrected. She thought of Hale's words, a fear that endures, and she shivered. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the galaxy respected nothing else. But as she looked down at her child's peaceful face, she whispered a different truth into the dark. We must be more than this. For you. For all of us. Hale stood guard outside, silent as ever, eyes fixed on the corridors beyond. Delegates whispered in distant chambers, fleets shifted across star maps, and treaties bent under the weight of new fear. Yet in that moment, the Council station belonged not to them, but to the humans who had changed its rhythm forever. The Warlord's head was gone now, finally removed by trembling hands, but the memory of it remained more vivid than any scar. It would haunt the Council halls for generations, a story told and retold, always ending with the same refrain. 10 minutes was all it took. And somewhere beyond the stars, empires recalculated, rebellions hesitated, and would-be conquerors paused, reminded of the single truth that now bound the galaxy. To strike at humanity's children was to invite annihilation. The lesson had been written, and it would not fade. The Council station never truly slept, but by the 5th cycle after the execution, its hum carried a different tone. Fear had cooled into calculation. Delegates convened not to condemn or mourn but to maneuver, each seeking advantage from the fault line Hale had carved across the galaxy's balance. Humanity was no longer a curiosity among elder civilizations. It was a question mark sharpened into a blade, and every empire asked itself whether that blade might one day turn their way. Ambassador Ilara Vos felt the weight of this shift more keenly than anyone. Each meeting was another duel of words, every smile concealing suspicion. She had spent years weaving humanity into the Council through patience and diplomacy, framing her people as resilient yet cooperative, determined but peace-minded. Now those threads frayed under the tension of Hale's actions. Where once she had argued for inclusion, she now found herself defending against exclusion, warning allies not to confuse humanity's resolve with aggression. Yet she could not dismiss the knowing truth in her heart, that perhaps even she did not fully understand what line Hale might cross if pressed again. Hale himself offered her no reassurance. He attended no sessions, joined no receptions, and answered no summons from the council. Instead, he spent long hours in the training decks, his frame moving with cold precision through combat forms few on the station had ever seen. Those who stumbled across him never lingered. There was something in his focus that suggested he did not practice for show, but for necessity. To Hale, the demonstration had not been the end of conflict but the beginning of a longer war, one waged not on open battlefields but in the shadows of perception and intent. The girl healed quickly, her steps once more light and unburdened, but even she sensed the gravity that followed Hale. She would often seek him out, tugging at his arm with a persistence only children possessed. Sometimes he allowed himself to be pulled along the corridors, silent and steady as she chatted about the things she saw, the gardens, the glowing water conduits, the music drifting from alien chambers. Ilara watched these moments with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Hale's silence was not emptiness, it was judgment contained, as if each word left unspoken was a blade sheathed only by choice. The central conflict began to crystallize in whispers and reports. The Carthage Dominion, humiliated, had not responded openly, but their fleets had shifted along border systems. Patrols doubled, outposts fortified, trade lanes rerouted. It was a response not of grief, but of strategy. Every envoy knew what it meant. They were waiting, calculating whether humanity's fury could be contained or provoked. Some said the Dominion would strike again, not at children but at colonies, to remind the galaxy that they were not cowed. Others believed they would bide their time, weaving alliances to ensure the next confrontation would not end with a severed head displayed before the council. Ilara brought these reports to Hale one evening, standing in the quiet of the human quarters. "They are moving fleets," she said, holding the datapad like an accusation. "We should be preparing for war." Hale looked up from the blade he was cleaning. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "We are always preparing for war. That is what survival demands." "This isn't survival," she countered, her voice sharper than intended. "This is escalation. Every action you take makes it harder for me to keep humanity in the council, harder to argue we belong here as equals, not as tyrants cloaked in fear." For a long moment he said nothing, the silence stretching until she feared he would not answer. At last, he spoke, his tone low. "Do you want them to see us as equals, Ilara? Or do you want your daughter to live? Because those two things are no longer the same." The words struck like a blow. She hated them, yet she could not deny their truth. She thought of the Warlord's eyes as he dragged her daughter forward, of the way every delegate had hesitated, frozen by protocol and politics. It had been Hale, and Hale alone, who had moved without hesitation. If survival demanded fear, then perhaps fear was the only shield humanity could trust. But still, she wondered, how long could a people walk in the shadow of fear without becoming the very monsters they sought to resist? The conflict between them deepened. Ilara fought in the chambers with words, Hale in the silence of his presence. Together they represented two faces of humanity, diplomacy and deterrence, patience and power. And though they moved in parallel, they were not aligned. The council saw this division and exploited it, pressing Ilara for concessions while carefully watching Hale for cracks in his restraint. Each day the tension grew, until the station itself seemed to hold its breath. One night, as the girl slept, Ilara approached Hale again. She found him by the viewport, as always, the stars reflected in his eyes. "If they strike again," she said, her voice soft but steady, "promise me you won't act alone. Promise me we'll decide together." He did not turn. "I cannot make promises I may not keep." Her breath caught. "Then what am I fighting for, Joran? If you won't trust me, if you won't trust humanity to choose its own path, then what is left?" At that, he turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something beneath his armor of calm, a flicker of weariness, a burden carried too long. "I trust humanity," he said quietly. "I do not trust the galaxy. And I will not gamble a child's life on the difference." The words hung between them, unbridgeable, and Ilara realized with a chill that their struggle was no longer only against the Dominion. The true conflict lay within humanity itself, between the path of fear and the path of faith, between Hale's iron shield and her fragile hope. Both sought to protect, yet each could undo the other. In the silence that followed, the station lights dimmed, signaling the cycle's end. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant, uncaring of the choices made beneath them. Ilara turned away, unable to answer him, and Hale returned his gaze to the void. The galaxy would move soon. Fleets already stirred, alliances already shifted, and when the next test came, humanity would either stand united or fracture under the weight of its own division. And in that quiet chamber, with a child's steady breathing echoing from the next room, the question remained: which shield would protect her when the galaxy struck again, the fragile weave of diplomacy or the unyielding edge of fear? The warning arrived not as words but as silence. Trade signals along the fringe of Dominion space ceased, ships vanished without distress calls, and border outposts that once buzzed with routine chatter fell quiet. The Council tried to mask their unease behind procedure, demanding reports, commissioning inquiries, forming committees. But Hale did not wait for paperwork to tell him what he already knew. The Dominion was moving, and their silence was the first strike. Ilara felt it in every conversation. Delegates who had once smiled now measured their words, weighing whether humanity was a shield to stand behind or target to avoid. She worked tirelessly, bending protocol to keep humanity tethered to the fragile alliances she had stitched together. Yet beneath the diplomacy lay a constant dread that all her work could be undone by a single act of violence from the man she both relied upon and feared. The girl sensed the tension too. She had grown quieter in recent days, her laughter rarer, as though she too had learned that the walls of the station listened. Still, she clung to Hale with a child's unshakable faith, untroubled by the shadows that unsettled others. To her, he was not a weapon or a symbol but simply the man who had carried her when she was broken, the one who never turned away when she reached for his hand. The first official report arrived during a late council session. A convoy near the Varan corridor had been found adrift, its crew slaughtered, the ship stripped of anything resembling human origin. No race claimed responsibility, but the signs were plain. This was Dominion work, a message carved in blood. The chamber erupted in argument, calls for sanctions, demands for investigations, pleas for restraint. Ilara fought to hold the floor, her voice sharp with urgency. If we allow this silence to stretch, it will not end with convoys. It will end with colonies. And when it does, no alliance will hold. But Hale was not there to hear her. He had already read the report before the council convened, and he knew what it meant. The Dominion was not testing the council's resolve, they were testing his. The head in the chamber had been a challenge answered. This was their reply. They did not fear humanity's wrath. They wanted to see if he would burn for a stranger's death as fiercely as he had for a child's. That night, Ilara confronted him. "If you move without sanction, you will undo everything," she said, standing between him and the hatch to his quarters. "Every alliance, every fragile thread holding us here, it will snap." He met her gaze with the same calm he wore in battle. "And if I do nothing, how many more will die before the council agrees to act?" "You can't keep protecting everyone by yourself," she snapped. "You'll make humanity into a terror, not a partner. They'll unite against us." "They'll unite," he answered, voice low and certain. "But not against us. Against those who believe they can slaughter without consequence. Fear may divide, but it also commands respect. And respect, Ilara, is the only currency this council understands." Her hands trembled, not with anger but with helplessness. She had seen the Warlord's head fall. She had seen the chamber bow to Hale's resolve. And though she wanted to believe in words, in law, in the fragile promise of cooperation, she could not shake the truth his actions carried. When danger came, the council froze, and only one man had moved. The girl stirred from her sleep then, wandering into the room with her hair tousled and eyes heavy with dreams. She climbed into Hale's lap without hesitation, curling against him as though the weight of the galaxy could not touch her there. Ilara watched, torn between gratitude and despair. For the child, there was no question of who kept her safe. For Ilara, the question was whether that safety would one day come at a cost too great for humanity to bear. The next morning, reports multiplied. More convoys lost, scouts missing, stations abandoned. The Dominion no longer whispered, they were roaring, daring humanity to respond. Hale sharpened his blade in silence, each pass across the whetstone a promise waiting to be kept. Ilara prepared her speech for the council, every word chosen to pull them back from the brink. Yet as she stood before the delegates, looking out over faces drawn tight with fear, she felt the futility of her task. They wanted reassurance, certainty, protection. They did not want words, they wanted someone to act. And somewhere beyond those walls, Hale was already moving. The girls' laughter echoed down the human quarters that evening, bright and unbroken, as though untouched by the tides gathering outside. But for Ilara, the sound was not comfort. It was a reminder of what was at stake, of what might be lost if Hale's path and his could not be reconciled. The Dominion had made their move. The Council hesitated. And humanity, caught between diplomacy and defiance, stood on the edge of a choice that would shape the galaxy's future. In the silence that followed, Ilara realized with a cold certainty that she might already be too late. Hale had never needed the Council's sanction. He had only ever needed a reason. And now, the Dominion had given him one.